Good evening and welcome to the debate.
Turn on your mic, please. Turn on your microphone.
Oh.
Yeah.
Are you guys on?
Okay.
Okay, we'll start again. Good evening and welcome to the debate sponsored by the Daily Hampshire Gazette between the two candidates running for Michael Allio, who's a member of the Green Party. They will be on the ballot in the special election next Tuesday, April 9th, to fill the seat left vacant last June by William P. Nagel, Jr. The first district represents citizens in Northampton, Hatfield, Southampton, and Westhampton. I'm Jim Foodie. I'm editor of the Gazette, and I will moderate the debate and ask questions that have been sent in by readers and members of the audience here today. Stan Moulton and Jim Degnam are here in the audience. If anyone has a question as we go along, they've got some index cards. You're free to write them down, and they'll bring them up. We'll try to take as many questions as we can. Before we get started, I just want to thank Northampton Community Television for broadcasting this event, which will be aired again Thursday at 6 p.m. and Friday and Sunday at 8 p.m. And also, I'd like to ask the audience to please withhold applause or any other expressions of support or disagreement with the candidates until the end of the forum, and that way we can get as many questions in as possible. We'll begin with opening statements. Each candidate will make an opening statement of 2 minutes, and we will begin with Peter Kokot.
Thank you, Jim. First of all, I want to thank all of those who offered me support in my primary candidacy victory. Thank you very much. People involved in my campaign are from every walk of life and from every age group, from grandmothers to students in high school. All of them are working long hours and are not being paid. And all of them only want one thing. All of my friends want me to transcend their expectations of what a legislator can do to improve our quality of life. People who have worked on my campaign and held signs and contributed are not doing it to curry favor or to pass a bill in the House or to try to get a state job. These friends and neighbors want to send me to Boston to provide real leadership and get this state back on track. Nothing is more obvious after the events of the past 9 months than we need new leadership in Boston. We have a legislature that is willing to take away the political rights of over 30,000 people without even an excuse. The mayor of Northampton called week after week. No explanations were offered to her as to why we were being prohibited from participating in the democratic system that our friends and family members fought and died for. 1 week from today, every person who votes in the 1st Hampshire District needs to take some time and think about their future. Powerful political forces in Boston do not want you to participate. Powerful political forces in Boston are counting on you, watching soap operas or taking a hike, or simply passing it off as something that does not matter in your life. I am challenging every person who is here, and every person who watches us on television, and every person who reads articles about us in the newspaper. Prove them wrong. Only you can take back your power. Show them that you are tired of the big dig taking all of your highway dollars. Show them that you are tired of UMass being cut every year. Show them that you are tired of human services workers being laid off while patronage positions are being added to courthouses in Boston. You and I can win this battle only if you participate. Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you to the Hampshire Gazette, and thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be part of this process. We live in a state that is a state politically, particularly in terms of the State House, that often seems to be hopeless to people in terms of politics. This is an exciting time for our district and for the state. What I am finding with this campaign, and what I have just honestly been absolutely thrilled to find, is a lot of hope. We live in a state that's in crisis. A recession is coming, and this recession that comes, the one that we are now confronted with, comes in the wake of one of the biggest economic booms that we've seen in the country since the 50s. In the process of this boom, there were many winners. Those winners were CEOs, people of high income, who watched their income soar. However, not everyone's income soared. The bottom 20%, and really the bottom 40% of income earners in the state watched their incomes decline through this economic boom. Not everybody was winners. Now we're faced with a recession. Times have grown more and more difficult for folks. Here in Massachusetts, in our State House, we have a State House that's filled with incumbents. In Massachusetts, we've ranked second worst in the entire country in terms of challenging incumbents, which means year after year, politicians walk into office without even a challenge. Issues aren't raised, like we've seen here in the district, which this is incredibly exciting, owed to people who are so interested in the political process. But unfortunately, we have a state house that's filled with incumbents. And what have these incumbents delivered us? They've delivered us a budgetary crisis like we haven't seen in more than a decade. As this crisis hits, we see huge budget cuts, mostly in the fields of education and healthcare. And as these budget cuts come, do they hurt those people who watched their incomes soar during the last decade? They do not. They hurt those same people who, even in the midst of an economic boom, watch their incomes decline. We need to send a message to the State House. It's time for real change, and I'm really honored to be part of this movement for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter and Michael. We're going to move to questions. And the questions...
I think we're not hearing the candidates well enough. The microphone's
Are
close.
they both on?
Okay, turn up the volume.
Maybe we can move them a little closer to, a little closer.
How's this?
Okay?
Can you hear me okay?
Good
No? Hello?
Okay, good, thank you. We're going to start a series of questions to the candidates. These are questions from readers and from some of you here in the audience, and they cover a range of topics. Certainly there is concern, as both Peter and Michael spoke to, there's concern among readers and citizens about how the legislature functions and about the economy in the region and the Commonwealth. Education is a big concern for people, and they've also submitted questions, a range of questions on everything from the death penalty to clean elections and health care. Each candidate will get 90 seconds to answer each of the questions, so both candidates will answer each question, and we'll alternate starting with Michael. So the first question, there is a widely held perception in the district and elsewhere in western Massachusetts that Beacon Hill does not understand our concerns. Do you think this is true? If so, what will you do as a legislature to change that?
First of all, it's doubtless that it's true. On Beacon Hill, like I said, incumbents go into office year after year unchallenged, and this is largely due to our approach to politics. Money is incredibly wed to politics, and the absence of having clean elections funded, it really is difficult for candidates to run effective campaigns against incumbents. Incumbents have incredible job security largely because they're financed by special interests, corporate interests. As long as this job security is there, as long as incumbents are not challenged throughout the state, and as long as there's not a real opportunity for people to express themselves via the vote, then we will not see politicians forced to be accountable to the public interest. And this is a crisis. It's a crisis that we've seen across the state. And here in Massachusetts, we may have per capita people more interested in politics than in any other state. Yet somehow our state house has really been bankrupted politically. Now, what is largely needed is reform with regard to how rules in the state house itself function in terms of the speaker's power to bottle up legislation in committee. Committees should have more power to bring legislation to a vote. Right now, the speaker, much like bottling up our own election here, which we had to fight so hard for, the speaker has the ability to bottle up legislation in committee. Committees should be empowered to take legislation that they believe represents people's interest before the House for a vote. That's what democracy is, and that's what's so fundamental to the fact that in this past election year, we saw less legislation passed than in any year previous for more than 125 years.
If you start with the proposition that Beacon Hill does not know what's happening in western Massachusetts, I think you're being unfair to many of the fine legislators that are out here, and that includes Stephen Kulik and Ellen Story. I think they know what's happening out here. I just think that they choose not to listen, and more importantly, they choose not to allocate resources fairly. One of the main goals that I have, if elected, is to reestablish a coalition of Western Mass legislators to make our voice heard on Beacon Hill and to implement constructive change to ensure that resources are adequately sent out here. I mean, if you look at the single example of the Springfield District Court, that court this year was cut by 23%. The Boston District Court, which has half of the caseload, saw its budget increase. Obviously, there is a close connection with the resources being allocated and the political power of the individuals that represent that district. I think it's very, very important that we try to put a face on this problem. For instance, Our largest employer is UMass Amherst. How many times have Beacon Hill legislators, Boston legislators, Lowell legislators been out, seen the campus, talked with students that are their constituents, and then when it comes time to do the annual dance that we have to do every year and allocate funding, how often do those legislators think of those people out at UMass? That has to happen.
Okay. Next question, we'll start with Peter. And let me just preface this by saying that a number of readers and some of the folks here today have expressed concern about the way the legislature works. The late budget, the crafting of a budget by a small handful of people, the delay in setting the special election has troubled many. And some readers wrote in and referred to the legislature as being in crisis. Others described it as undemocratic. I have a couple questions that I've condensed here that are related to this concern. Peter, you'll start with this one. Do you believe too much power is concentrated with the House Speaker? And how would you explain the vote to award Mr. Finneran life tenure, House Speaker Thomas Finneran, life tenure, and what would you do to change this situation?
Does the Speaker have an excess of power? Yes. How did he arrive at that position? No Speaker has ever held a gun to the head of any legislator. Every single legislator has to go home every night and face their constituents and rationalize their vote. If legislators want to vote to limit the power of the Speaker, they can vote that way. We had a perfect example last year. Legislators voted for a Speaker for life. They took away term limits. Every one of those legislators from Western Massachusetts, from Eastern Massachusetts, that voted for that was giving the Speaker of the House additional power. If elected, I'm going to work very, very closely with the progressive members of the House to enact meaningful rules reform to make sure that this never happens again. Every legislator needs to have the dialogue that we have had in this district for the last 2 months. Every legislator needs to face the issues that we've been talking about in this political campaign. The way to make sure that the Speaker of the House does not have excess power is to make sure that every legislator hears from their constituents and knows that they will not stand for it.
The Speaker clearly has too much power to bottle up legislation in the House. It's antithetical to the idea of democracy to have so much power vested in one person, particularly in the House of Representatives, the Mass House of Representatives, which is supposed to represent the popular interest of the people of the state. So we're clearly in a dilemma. What we need to have legislators who will be accountable to the public's concerns. The public has expressed much outrage. Voters are furious that one person can bottle up such important legislation as, say, clean elections, single-payer health care. His effect on state politics is largely autocratic and absolute. What we need to do is we need to elect legislators who will have voices that are bold to work together, and I will work regionally with local representatives to work to challenge the Speaker's rule. And it's not a personal vendetta that we carry. It's not Tom Finneran who's to blame for this exclusively. It's the fact that we empower Mr. Finneran with so much, we vest him with so much power as Speaker. The rules of Speaker must change, and that's crucial. We can't expect to have a political process that represents our needs if we have an autocratic state house that does not respect democracy. And I believe that a way to put pressure on legislators across the state is via a third-party movement, a movement that shows if legislators are going to fail to represent people's interests, then we will challenge them, number one, and replace them, number two.
Do you believe in the clean elections law? And as a legislator, what types of electoral reforms would you support to make our political system more democratic? We'll start with Michael.
I absolutely believe in clean elections. I am the campaign's only clean elections candidate, and I am understanding in a very first-hand way, a very direct way, what it means to be a clean candidate and what exactly the role of money in politics is. Following clean elections guidelines means I limit myself to a certain amount of contributions, $6,500 in total, and in direct contributions, $3,200 in in-kind contributions, payment for things like copies. There are many technicalities to clean elections, and we're following all of them to the T, because what we find in the state is that we find that people have watched politicians become unprincipled. I will champion clean elections as a legislator, but I will always demonstrate and practice the principles of clean elections. Now, clean elections is at the heart of really creating a legislative arena where people can get involved. It's money in politics that discourages people from running. In Maine, when similar legislation as to clean elections was passed, in one election cycle, 30% more incumbents were challenged by people that one might consider outsiders, like myself. These challenges are crucial to holding politicians accountable. Another form of electoral reform that I would support, particularly as a third-party candidate, is instant runoff voting, which assists people in voting their conscience. So a vote for one person is not perhaps a punishment because you get to vote your conscience, which I'd love to explain in detail, but my time is up.
The first thing that I did when I thought about this campaign and what had happened and the need for the 1st Hampshire to have a powerful voice in Boston was to find out what are the rules of this special election. I asked for a ruling from the Office of Campaign and Political Finance. They clearly indicated that no clean elections funding would be available for this race. The legislature has failed on every level on this issue. My main priority when elected will be to fully fund the clean elections law. 30 days after the primary, 30 days after April 9th, the new elections cycle starts for this district. I will register as a clean elections candidate, and if I am elected, I will fight for full funding of the law.
Okay. We received several questions in both at the Gazette and here today, with people expressing some concerns about the ability of each of you to deal effectively with the existing power structure in the legislature. Let me put a slightly different question to each of you on that subject, and we'll start with Peter. Peter, the concern is that as an aide to Representative Nagel for 20 plus years, you are already too much of an insider to challenge the Speaker. One reader wrote, if you feel so strongly about clean elections and single-payer health care, why didn't your office advocate for these issues during the 20 years you worked as Bill Nagel's aide?
Part of this race has been my great surprise that one of the major issues that folks want to talk about is whether I am Bill Nagel, whether I lived in a small room in his home, whether I held his coat, whether we checked our wardrobes every day when we were on our way down to Boston. Let me be very, very clear. I am not him. Bill Nagel's political role, the bills that he chose to fight for were his. If elected, the issues that I will fight for are mine and yours. I will be an ardent advocate for single-payer health care, clean elections, funding UMass, a new education formula, trying to give real salaries to human services workers. The underlying question is, how will you deal with the Speaker? It's not that simple. There are many people in the legislative process you have to deal with. You have to deal with your colleagues. You have to deal with committee chairs. You have to deal with agencies. You have to deal with members of the leadership team. I'm going to deal with Tom Finneran, if he is Speaker still, the same way I have always dealt with him. I'm going to get the best information I can. I'm going to speak clearly to him. I'm going to fight hard for my constituents. And I'm going to work with my colleagues and build coalitions around issues that are important to you.
Michael, the question to you in a similar vein is a little different, obviously. The concern is that because you are not a member of one of the major parties, it'll be hard for you to wield much influence in the House or affect change. Someone put the question a little differently here. Essentially, how will you be able to bring home the bacon for the towns in our district?
Sure. Well, first of all, I will work in collaboration with progressive legislators across the state, and particularly here in the vicinity of the 1st Hampshire District. It's Representative Story, Representative Kulik, and I will seek the guidance of those people who are experienced. I've already begun researching this in anticipation of being elected, looking to how exactly we can bring home the bacon, particularly as a Green legislator. And what the entire state will be looking at is, can I do it? And I'm completely confident. It's not brain surgery. It's difficult. You study it, you do it. I'm completely confident that I will do it, and I will be charged with the belief that demonstrating that it's possible, and it is possible, and what's possible, what needs to be done, is not an outrageous concept. We need funding for our schools, funding for our programs. These things I will fight for rationally within the House. Demonstrating that it can be done demonstrates the ability for a third party to be viable. I take that charge and I take it along with all of the supporters, the thousands of supporters that have come out in this district saying we need change. We have a state house filled with people steeped in experience. They're steeped in experience because they're entrenched incumbents, and they are entrenched incumbents because they're not challenged. We need more than just experience right now. It's time for new leadership and for vision. And I will take that and I will show the state and I will show the district that we can, I can, and I will, in fact, bring home the bacon. And I will, of course, seek the input of the community constantly throughout that process.
Okay. Let's move into an area of also of concern to folks is the economy. Based on a referendum vote of the people, the state income tax is scheduled to be rolled back from the current 5.3% to 5% in January of 2003. Do you support freezing the rollback in the income tax as a way of generating income for the state, or do you favor some other option? We'll start with Michael.
I do support freezing the tax cut. Beyond that, in Massachusetts, as I've already said, the people who have been suffering most are people of low and moderate income. They are the people who, even in the course of the economic boom, saw their incomes decline. We are considered to have what is called a regressive tax policy in Massachusetts. That means that we tax people of low and moderate income disproportionately. A disproportionate percentage of low and moderate income people's income is spent on paying taxes. That's largely to our dependence on sales taxes. We need to look to corporate loopholes. Raytheon pushed for a large tax cut in the past years, and they got that tax cut, saving well over, for Raytheon, saving over $100 million, meaning the taxpayers, due to a tax cut explicitly for Raytheon, our tax revenue loses that $100+ million. There are similar corporate loopholes that stack up. We need a fair and effective capital gains tax that taxes investment as income. Very simply, this can generate between $300 and $600 million a year. We need to close corporate loopholes. And when seeking, we need to increase the pie. We look at these budget cuts. We don't want to just prioritize between budget cuts. We need to increase the revenue that our state gets. But when doing that, we can't disproportionately affect those people who are already most hit by the budget cuts and by the recession. So I support a progressive tax system as a method to compensate for the crisis that we're now in.
Peter.
The Commonwealth of Massachusetts currently faces a shortfall heading into the next fiscal year of $3 billion. I support the freeze on the tax rollback. However, that only relates to a $200 million savings, leaving us with $2.8 billion that we have to make up. Tapping into our stabilization fund, the tobacco trust, gets us down to about $1.5 billion. We still have to make more cuts. We have to look at other tax sources, including every one of the 28 tax cuts that the legislature has enacted in the last 10 years. But let's back up a little bit. Mrs. Kitely asked a very good question at one of our previous forums, and that was, is there some mechanism to open up the books at various state agencies, in school departments, in towns and cities? And there really is. However, it's not being utilized correctly. We have entities like the House Post Audit Committee, the IG, the Auditor, the Revenue Department, that all have statutory authority to go into agencies, audit programs, audit contractors, take a look at what's happening, do current programs meet current needs? Are we spending money on things that we don't have the money for right now? We need to reinvigorate those entities, get them out there in the field, find some savings, implement those savings, and make government make sense.
Can we just follow up on that a little bit, and maybe we'll start with Peter and come back to Michael and let take another minute here. Peter, you're suggesting that in fact there are some additional ways that the state can save money, or that state and public institutions can save money.
The contractor on the big dig has an incentive built into their contract to look at value engineering, to look at what they're doing on the ground, techniques that they're using, and to report back and attempt to save money on every single contract on the big dig. The big dig is a $14.3 billion project. To date, the contractor has returned to the Commonwealth less than $500,000. Those agencies that were put in place prior to the project being started, that the legislature asked to do good audits and talk to engineers, came out with good audits and did talk with engineers. Perfect example is the Fort Point Channel. The House Post Audit Committee investigated that contract and indicated to the Weld administration that their boring schedule was incomplete. They didn't listen to us. It ended up costing you, the taxpayers, over $100 million extra.
Michael, you want to take a shot at that? So are there some ways in which the government and public institutions can save money? We're talking about generating money in the beginning, but save money.
Well, to begin with, in terms of saving money, where we should be looking is we should be looking to save money from those people who can most afford to lose the benefits that they've already won through lobbying. Instances like the Big Dig, instances like Raytheon. Now, Raytheon demanded a tax cut. The legislature folded. They said, sure, take your tax cut. What's $150 million to the taxpayers of Massachusetts? Raytheon's incentive for this tax cut was that they were going to keep manufacturing jobs in the state. Now, in this age of globalization, manufacturing jobs are very precious. So what happens after the tax cut? Manufacturing jobs leave the state. Raytheon says, oh, we're going to ship jobs out of the state anyways. Did they get the tax cut? They did. Did the jobs leave the state? They did. Did we penalize them? Did we take the tax cut back? We did not. Now, this is really important. When we talk about saving money, though, where do we look to save money? If you look down at the long list of budget cuts don't relate to Raytheon. Budget cuts relate to our education system, to our healthcare system. People on Mass Health just lost their dental care. So when we look to save money, we need to make sure that we prioritize as a legislature, and we hold our legislators accountable, that we prioritize the money comes up from those people who are skimming money off the top, not from the people who most depend on state funds.
Okay. There were several reports and a lot of talk last year about patronage jobs in Massachusetts government or agencies like Massport. What can be done to eliminate jobs that are not necessary, and to make sure that the people hired are hired based on what they know and not whom they know? We'll start with Michael.
Sure. We need to have better accounting, better oversight of all government agencies, particularly agencies which are involved in big business. Because as we too well know, and you can cite the Big Dig, you can cite Raytheon, you can cite the insurance companies, when companies are left to themselves, or perhaps really importantly, you can cite nonprofit hospitals that are more and more becoming privatized. In each of these instances, related, similar to Massport, when there's not public, transparent, and open public oversight of these processes, then they invariably turn against public interest. And so what's really important is that, number one, the oversight happens, number two, that it's transparent, that it's available to the public, but then number three, when there are glaring contradictions in these trends, that our legislators come to our communities and say, these are those glaring contradictions. I haven't had a legislator come to me and talk to my community, to come publicly and to say, this is what's going on, this is why we should stop it. These are the jobs that are being handed out that are actually not even being worked. There's jobs handed out, salaries given, nobody filling the jobs whatsoever. This is something that we need our legislators to do, is to speak boldly and loud and clear to our communities about these situations of corruption that need to be eradicated.
Peter.
Bob Sarasoli was not reappointed. What does that mean to all of us? What that means is Bob Sarasoli was the IG. As IG, he went into virtually every state agency, and in particular the really big ones like Massport, Big Dig, and did outstanding performance audits. What he got from that was powerful political figures vowing that he would never retain that job once his term expired. There is a direct causal relationship between the lack of use of entities like the House Post Audit Committee, Senate Post Audit Committee, the IG and the auditor with this exact problem. If you have good audit entities going into agencies, flipping over the rocks, looking at who's who, looking at people, looking if people have actual titles, looking if people are actually showing up for work, looking if programs are making sense, those entities have seen their roles in the last 10 years get less and less. I'm going to say something radical here to many of you in this room. Bill Nagel did a good job. When he was the House Post Audit Chairman, he did outstanding work routing out fraud, waste, and abuse in state contracts and agencies. His recommendations on the big dig alone would have saved you taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. We have to get back to that frame of mind.
Questions on economic development, and we'll start with Peter. As a legislator, what would you do to promote economic development in the region?
This is perhaps the easiest question that we're going to get today, and because, at least in my mind, education is the key. Out of the 3.2 million workers in Massachusetts, 1.2 million are unprepared to compete in the modern marketplace. Whether it be language skills, math skills, reading skills, they're not there. We need to immediately undertake a massive effort to train these employees to make our businesses more productive. The major challenge of high-tech companies in this state today is not taxes. It's not land, it's not water, it's not infrastructure. It's trying to obtain enough H-1 visas to import an immigrant workforce into this state to fill technical jobs. We need to train our own people. We need to keep jobs here for our own people. Our businesses cannot expand. We cannot attract new businesses if we have an untrained workforce. It's going to be one of my highest priorities.
We, as a district, as a state, and as towns, need to encourage local business, and we need to hold on to our local business and cherish our local business. Something that I find incredibly encouraging here in Northampton are the ordinances that are before the City Council now, the so-called big box ordinances. These ordinances, more than anything else, demonstrate that people, that the community, can get involved in what local development looks like, that we, the people, can become part of the vision for tomorrow. We can determine what we want development to look like. And this is really crucial, especially in the era where big businesses eat up other big businesses, which eat up smaller businesses, which then incredibly affect the character of our town, what our town looks like, our infrastructure, the strain on our city's resources, and the strength of our local businesses and the strength of local labor. For people to be involved with local development is absolutely crucial. We need to support local business, local development, and we need to encourage strong labor practices, unionized labor force. I'd like to see the state and the districts in our towns given more money to lend out to businesses, to new businesses who are trying to open up and to have innovative approaches to whether it's retail, the high-tech industry, whatever it might be. We need to lend all the support that we can, and we need to take leadership from folks like the people that are starting the River Valley Market in Northampton, a cooperative. And what better way to invest funds in our community than a locally owned cooperative where everybody becomes an owner of a small local business.
Let me stay with the issue of development for a moment and talk about a specific development and read this question. There is a growing concern that the Hospital Hill project, combined with burgeoning development in western and northern areas of Northampton, will seriously affect the quality of life in existing neighborhoods. What can be done to ensure that the new development will not have a negative impact which cannot be mitigated to the satisfaction of residents? So this is the Hospital Hill project, and we'll start with Michael.
Thank you. Another very good example of how development needs to be the priority not just of a city government, but of the people who will be most affected by that development. And in this case, there's a long history of the city working in close coordination with both developers and the community to consult on what the possible effects of this development might be. Now, one of the biggest concerns for residents living near the development is increased traffic. This is a huge concern. There's already a large amount of traffic traveling up and down 66 and Route 10 South Street every single day. Here in Northampton, we have inordinate levels of car accidents, traffic accidents. So we're going to close to double the traffic flow on these streets by building this development. Not quite double. In any case, what is necessary is that the residents, the citizens who will be most affected by this development, is that they weigh in on the process. And this is something that has happened to a limited extent. The Citizens Advisory Council has residents from the South Street area on it, but only recently. It's been a long time before they've been officially seated, before residents who would be most affected by this development were officially seated, so that they would have direct influence in terms of being residents who are going to be most affected by the increased traffic flow. The city's taken real steps to mitigate traffic concerns, but the absolute priority throughout the state hospital development is that the community members who are living right near the state hospital are able to have influence, impact constantly on the development of this process.
Peter?
This project is sort of like one of my children. I've been working on it since 1981. I'm the person that wrote the law that allows, that basically sets up the system which talks about the process of the hospital and its reuse. All of the concerns, all of the problems, all of the wishes that not only the people that are directly next to this property have, but people throughout the area have in relation to this project can be solved. But it's going to be very, very expensive. And I think this is one of the major examples where having a legislator with experience and knowledge and with connections to agencies and with connections to this project and its history will benefit the people of Northampton. There is currently a $5 million pool of money that the legislature enacted for the reuse of this hospital. It can be used in many ways. The current entity, which is in charge of reuse, does not have access to those funds. If elected, I'm going to ensure that those funds are transferred to the current entity which is overseeing this project. I'm also going to ensure that Mass Highway commits sufficient resources to the roadways, not only in the city, but around the property to mitigate any major traffic problems.
Okay. We'll move on to education. Due to decreasing monies available from the state, schools are having a difficult time developing budgets that balance the needs of students with the ability of citizens to raise enough tax money to pay for programs. What can the legislature do about this? The question was framed a little differently. What is the first step you would take as a legislator to help adequately fund education? We'll start with Peter.
First thing I would do is pass a House rule that mandates that the budget be passed on time every year. If school systems have the information that they need to budget, they can do a great job. If they're faced with the situation that we had last year, where no one knows how much money they have, it's impossible to allocate funds in a meaningful way. Michael touched on the issue of the pie. The pie is not big enough. The current education formula did not account for all of the things that we need to have happen in our schools to make MCAS make sense, to make the schools make sense under ed reform. The pie must be bigger. Commonwealth of Massachusetts currently ranks near the bottom of all states in terms of the amount of state revenue it allocates to each community for education. We as people in Massachusetts account near the middle of all states in terms of the per capita contributions to education. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts needs to revisit the issue of how it pays for public education. The property tax is not going to work. We need to find some other method, whether it's a percent of the sales tax or some other revenue source to fund education in Massachusetts. Perfect example is Within the city of Northampton, we have extraordinarily high special ed costs. The legislature every year has appropriated $535,000 to meet this need. We've got to find a way that we don't have to make this political fight every year and make it a fair funding formula for everyone.
As a special education high school teacher in South Hadley was faced with budgetary crisis year after year. Because of that budgetary crisis, the school could not provide the services as mandated by the state that it needed to provide in order to be accredited. Because it didn't have the funds from the state to provide these services, their accreditation was put on sort of probation. South Hadley said to the state, look, we don't have the resources to provide the services you're demanding we provide. The state answered, we know you don't. And then South Hadley said, but you're putting us on probation anyways. And they said, that's right. It's an illogical circumstance. It just doesn't work. What does this mean? This means that we don't provide the services that our students need, number one, to learn, but number two, to graduate, to deal with things like the MCAS effectively. On account of that, I've seen many of my students drop out of school, start to fail, start to lose encouragement and hope of ever graduating. We need to, number one, relook at the 1993 Massachusetts Education Reform Act. We need to have a better, more fair formula for providing funding to our towns. The towns in this district lost out by that act. Also, we need to support our schools and our charter schools and have them work together. And this is an important thing, and it's a controversial issue. In our town, in our district, in our state, charter schools serve a very vital role to our public education system. But with the funding formula the way it is now, public schools and charter schools are pitted against one another. We have to have a funding formula so each, charter schools and public schools, can receive adequate funding without pitting the two against one another. It's very crucial for the sake of our children.
Let's stay with ed reform and let's talk a little more about charter schools and MCAS. What is your position on charter schools and MCAS testing, two of the major changes that were brought about by ed reform? We'll start with Peter.
Charter schools are not evil. The intent of charter schools was to provide a competition to public schools, to create new ways of teaching, to innovate, and to share those innovations with public schools. The mean trick that was played on us all was that charter schools were not funded in a way that held harmless public schools. This problem is especially chronic here in Northampton, where you have two charter schools taking students away from the city. At $7,000 apiece, Northampton next year is looking at losing somewhere in the range of $800,000 or more to these schools. My position is that the legislature should fully fund charter schools and hold harmless sending public schools so that no public school dollars are lost because of the presence of a charter school. I think that charter schools and public schools should not fight, but should fight together to increase the size of the pie to benefit everyone. MCAS. MCAS was the offspring of the Ed Bill, which was born via a court suit. The Ed Bill never said that we should have one standardized test for all students. It said students should be tested comprehensively. Is MCAS useful as a measuring tool? Yes. Should we have one standardized test? No.
So first, charter schools. Again, specifically as a special education teacher, I've seen firsthand that some students need alternative classroom environments, particularly in the face of the fact that we do not prioritize public education in our budget enough. We do not have the resources at all times in our public schools to provide that alternative education environment. In that case, charter schools provide an incredibly important role in our public school system to be funded by public dollars. And this is really important. Our public school system cannot be forgotten, of course. And the funding formula as it is now, unfortunately, it does exactly that. It pits our public schools and our charter schools against one another. Again, $825,000 is projected next year to go from Northampton public schools to charter schools. If the state funds directly public schools and charter schools adequately, then charter schools and public schools can work in concert to create a better public education system. Now again, particularly as a special education teacher, I can't say this emphatically enough. The MCAS should not be held as criteria for graduation. It is an unfair measure when held as a sole criteria for graduation. I have too many students that know they will not pass it and have therefore dropped out of school, or that will not pass it, that will try time and time again, and therefore will not graduate, and their entire public education career would then not feel fulfilling or gratified. Standardized tests have a role, but as mandated by the state, we need multiple forms of assessment, and therefore multiple forms of determination of graduation requirement, not just the MCAS solely.
I'm going to move on to some other topics. There's a lot here. What is your position? We'll start with Michael. What is your position on the death penalty?
I am absolutely opposed to the death penalty. It is a barbaric form of punishment. It does not belong in Massachusetts. It does not belong in our country. Many countries in the world consider it an illegal use of our criminal justice system. And I will fight with other legislators in Massachusetts to make sure that the death penalty does not make it into Massachusetts. And this is a fight that needs to take place because we've seen other very reactionary trends in our criminal justice system, like the use of solitary confinement, like taking the right to vote away from our prisoners. So I will stand against the death penalty firmly, along with the public and along with other legislators in the State House.
Capital punishment is racist and has no place in a modern society. Our office led the fight to stop capital punishment here in Massachusetts. We worked with a number of organizations, both here and in Ireland and in South Africa, and worked very hard to turn around a tie vote. And I'm proud to say that we won that fight 3 years ago in the legislature. And if the bill ever comes up for a vote again, I will be an ardent advocate to make sure that capital punishment is never law in Massachusetts.
A couple questions about the university, and we'll start with Peter. Peter, describe the importance of the University of Massachusetts to your district and the steps you would take to promote it on Beacon Hill.
Not only is the University of Massachusetts the largest workplace in this area, it's a symbol. It's a symbol to me of the promise of this area. It's also a symbol to me of the pernicious things political forces in Boston can do when they are left on their own. If you look at the University of Massachusetts and you look at the cuts that were made in the previous problems that we had back in the late 80s and first part of the 90s, those cuts have never been put back at UMass. The professorships that were lost then have never come back. Over $1 million a year is being taken out of the academic core at UMass and put into non-academic areas, patching sidewalks, giving scholarships to athletes. UMass could be the flagship of our university system. The University of Massachusetts system could be one of the finest university systems in the country. Right now, we're losing professors. Because we're losing professors, we're losing top grad assistants. Because we're losing those folks, we are losing top students. At what point does the university hit a point where it's not a top research institution and it becomes a second-rate university? We are rapidly approaching that point. I'm not going to let it happen. Providing adequate funding for UMass will be one of my top priorities.
I'm a proud graduate of the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and I am very, very grateful for the education I received there. And also, I was very proud of the fact that more and more on a national level, the University of Massachusetts in Amherst was receiving national accolade in terms of students from across the country attending universities outside of their state. The University of Massachusetts in Amherst is one of the most highly attended universities in the country. And there's a reason for this, because we have fantastic departments. Our foreign language department was once one of the greatest foreign language departments in the country. and now it is bordering on not being a department whatsoever. $15 million has been cut from UMass alone, over 300 faculty gone, 100 professors gone. This means that the quality of our public education is in jeopardy. I've worked alongside graduate students and faculty and undergraduate students at UMass throughout my career at UMass and since. I will continue to work as a legislator. Now, what's really important is the stale State House has delivered us even more stale Republican governors now for a decade. These Republican governors have incredible influence. They have sole control over who is nominated to be on the Board of Trustees at UMass. The Board of Trustees is largely comprised of people whose top priority is not public education. What does this do for public education? It puts it in jeopardy. The people of the state have to take back public education so it serves public interest, not so it's turned over to private interest.
This is a question that we'll start with Michael. Many people are uninsured or underinsured due to prohibitive costs, although they may work. What would you propose to do about the health care crisis in the state? And a related question, do you support a single-payer health care system?
Well, the related question should be the primary answer. I support a single-payer health care system wholeheartedly. With every fiber in my being, I will fight for a single-payer health care system. And we got really close via a ballot initiative to having single-payer health care passed. And this speaks to the bankruptcy of our State House and to the influence of money in politics and to voter disenfranchisement. Why was there a ballot initiative? Because we, the people, don't believe that our legislators are going to propose legislation that adequately addresses our public interest. What happened with the ballot initiative? Well, the health care industry, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, spent $7 million on fighting against the single-payer health care ballot initiative. Folks like you and I, who support single-payer health care, spent around $50,000. This is a ratio of approximately 140 corporate dollars versus one public dollar in a campaign to defeat single-payer health care. So in the face of this huge corporate onslaught against single-payer health care, how did the ballot initiative go? It went really well. It lost 52% to 48%. We were almost there. Now, what would that vote have looked like if we had legislators across the state advocating publicly, holding town meetings and press conferences, saying we need single-payer health care? It makes health sense, it makes elder sense, it makes child sense, and it makes fiscal sense. It will save us money. We need single-payer health care, and I will work publicly to support it.
I am a strong advocate for single-payer health care. I will sign on that bill as one of my first acts once elected. But there's one more piece, I think, that we have to talk about, and that is, where have many of the cuts in our healthcare system come from? Congress and the President in 1997 made substantial cuts in the dollars flowing from Washington north to us. The current administration, President Bush, has proposed in his latest filing substantial healthcare dollar cuts, billions of dollars to research hospitals, to home health agencies, to virtually every aspect of the healthcare system. If elected, I'm going to work very closely with Senator Kerry, Senator Kennedy, Congressman Frank, Congressman Neal, Congressman Over, to make sure that our voice is heard not only in Boston, but also in Washington, where so many of these dollars come from. We need to reassert ourselves on the national scene and bring some of these dollars back here. And it's not just for big institutions like Harvard Med School or BU Med School. It's important to Cooley Dickinson Hospital. Craig Mellon has done a great job keeping that institution in the black. I want to work closely with him to make sure that he never has to lay off another nurse. No more nurse layoffs in this district if I'm elected. I'm going to work very hard for that.
Question, and we'll start with Peter. What have you done and what will you do to support affordable housing in the district?
I spent 8 years of my life at Hampshire Heights. I wrote the legislation to reuse Northampton State Hospital. A major component of that bill is to build many more units of housing here in Northampton, along with Senator Rosenberg's office, we were successful in finding a special appropriation of over $2 million to renovate Hampshire Heights, to put on new roofs, new sewers, new bathrooms. There's currently a $500 million housing bond issue working its way through the Massachusetts legislature. I'm going to sign on to that bill. I'm going to work very, very closely with folks like Peter Gagliardi at HAP and the mayor of Northampton and my selectmen to ensure that state dollars flow back to this area to build new units. The estimate right now is that we need to build over 20,000 units a year to meet the demand for housing in the state. Policemen, firemen, teachers making median salaries here in Northampton cannot afford a home here. We need to provide housing for all people here in Northampton. We need to make sure that the reuse of Northampton State Hospital is a mixed-use project where we do not segregate people by income, that the housing units are mixed. I will work very, very hard to make sure that Northampton gets a maximum share of housing dollars from the Commonwealth.
Massachusetts ranks as the 4th least affordable state in the entire country to live in. Affordable housing is a crisis in Massachusetts. With this recession we now face, and with budget cuts, it's becoming more of a crisis. I was very sad to read a few days in the Globe, in the Boston Globe, that transitional housing assistance to those renters who need help to pay their back paying rent because they couldn't afford to pay rent, so they've now defaulted several months on paying rent, is being cut significantly. This could put up to 1,500 families at risk of eviction and on the border of homelessness. It's a real serious issue. Here in our district, I've worked closely with the tenants of Meadowbrook, and the situation of Meadowbrook really speaks to the affordable housing crisis. The tenants of Meadowbrook have been leading a campaign to keep housing affordable at Meadowbrook. Their property was recently bought. When bought, the mortgage has been controlled by the state. The state ensures that an affordable package will be preserved there. It's at the whim of the new owner of the property to preserve affordable housing at Meadowbrook or not. I make a public call to Mr. Grinspoon to do the right thing, and I believe that he may, to keep housing affordable at Meadowbrook. But what we're confronted with is a situation where it can be at the whim of the property owner to keep housing affordable. I support building new affordable housing, but we need to preserve our affordable housing now. We need to have our state and our city's own affordable housing units. So every 40 years or so, we don't have to go through the same fight over and over again to preserve affordable housing units.
Oh, no, you missed it. I'm sorry.
I thought you did a pretty good job.
You did a good job. We have a couple questions about wildlife. Should the legislature try to redress the worsening problems with beavers in the wake of ballot questions banning certain kinds of traps? And also, should hunters again be allowed to use dogs to hunt black bear as a way to better control the growing bear population in Northampton? We'll start with Mike.
Sure. My quick and easier answer is we need to address it. I'm not sure how. And this is just honest, you know. It's something that my attention has been brought to, and I haven't determined yet the best way to do it. And what we should do as legislators, and something that convinced me to run in the first place for office, and that makes me so convinced that the real choice is for new leadership in the State House, is that I as a legislator have the ability to call town meetings, to call open public meetings for people to come together and debate issues, or to call special meetings where people of varying differences, of varying opinions can come together and weigh in. So what I would do as a legislator is I would bring a variety of people who weigh in on these issues differently, have them sit down together, go over it all, hash it all out, see where we agree and disagree, and go from there. And I'd be thrilled as a legislator to learn from that process and to then make a decision.
The problem with bears right now is not so much a problem with bears, it's a problem with people, and that's that people like to have a home with a nice, like a large lot, 1 acre lot. I think if you look around Northampton, you'll see these homes being popped up in areas that were formerly either open space or forested. And you really have to commend Mayor Higgins and Wayne Fiden and the folks here in the city of Northampton that spend a lot of their time applying for grants to purchase open space. I've worked with them on these things for years. And one great example is the Sawmill Hills and the Mineral Hills. Those are vast areas that are prime bear habitat. I hike up there all the time with my kids and my wife and my dog. And there's areas up there that hold bears right now. So what we have to do is do our very best effort to make sure that we have the resources out here to maintain open space. In terms of the beavers, Mass Audubon actually has put together a great plan that they have various techniques that they use using baffle dams and perforated pipe and screening to actually try to convince the beavers that their natural instincts are incorrect, and that if there is moving water, that they don't have to build a dam in that location. I don't support bears being used for hunting. I just think that we need to do, we really need to get all the resource folks in one room if there is a problem in an area of town and talk it through, and there are solutions out there.
Final question, we'll start with Peter. What steps will you take to stay in touch with your constituents and make sure that you are representing the interests of the people in your district?
I think it's important for every legislator to not only hold office hours in their towns. Historically, we've had office hours in every town in the 1st Hampshire District on Fridays, but to expand that into issue-based office hours. If you have folks downtown that are worried about the issue of big boxes, if you have folks up on Ryan Road that have bear problems, if you have folks in Hatfield that are worried about the mountains being used for housing, if you have folks in Southampton who have a problem with a huge tire dump, I've found that these meetings are really effective. Bring together all the interested parties. Don't worry about who gets credit for that meeting. Make sure that all the stakeholders are in the room. Have the meeting and follow up on it. Touch base with folks that next week and form a relationship with them so that when they call, they trust you and you trust them. And there's no information that's not out there. My number is in the phone book. I have an office in Florence. People call me every single day. I'm going to keep doing what I have been doing for the last 20 years, and that's helping the people of the 1st Hampshire District.
I believe that grassroots democracy is fundamental for a healthy government, period. The scope of what my campaign has looked like, I think, speaks to what, as a legislator, I would aim to do. In the absence of dollars, my campaign has been powered by wonderful people, volunteers who are willing to go to walk door to door, to knock on people's houses, to say, hello, my name is so-and-so. I support this campaign because, and just to go ahead and talk, get down to earth, really figure out where we are all at. This has been the theme of the campaign. It's been the most beautiful aspect of the campaign. As a legislator, I'll hold monthly town meetings in each of the towns so that people can come forward and discuss issues. I'll hold press conferences to invite people from various newspapers, the Gazette, the Union News, radio, TV, so that issues that are dear to the community get press, and so that we can have public education campaigns so people of the community can be well informed, because it takes a well-informed community to make well-informed legislators and to have well-informed government, and then to hopefully have sound legislation that speaks to our interests. And then also, I intend on being in the community as much as possible. To have a legislator be accountable to you, the legislator needs to know your vision, your need, your want, your desires. If the legislator does not know that, it's too easy to say, oh, I didn't know. I never want to be able to say I didn't know. I want to be accountable. I want to be held accountable to the people of the district.
Each of the candidates will now offer a 2-minute closing statement, and we will begin with Michael Alio.
Thank you. Thank you all for your wonderful attention. I speak to you knowing that we are on the doorstep of creating real democracy in the state of Massachusetts. We have a historic opportunity here, an opportunity to elect the first Green legislator in the history of the state, an opportunity to show the rest of the state of Massachusetts that politics as usual will not work anymore. I've been pleased to know that we have the attention of the entire state. State legislators, U.S. congressmen, state congressmen, and women all have been focusing on this election. We've made press across the state. the front page of the Boston Globe. We've attracted supporters. We've attracted progressive Democrats, liberal Democrats, unenrolled Republicans. We've had people register who haven't registered in more than a decade because finally they feel that there's a reason to vote, that their vote counts. Why does their vote count? Because their vote can elect a change that the whole state will notice. If we do this, we put entrenched incumbents across the state on notice that if you continue to be unaccountable to your constituencies, you will be challenged. Massachusetts will not remain the second worst state in the country in terms of challenging incumbents. We will lead a movement to really challenge incumbents and to speak towards public interest. And I'm very proud to be working with the wonderful people of this district and to receive so much support. And I encourage you to go ahead, cast your vote in your conscience. And if your conscience tells you that it's time to make a difference in the State House, cast your vote for me. And I will support, legislate, advocate, and be in touch with the community at all times. Thank you.
9 months ago, no one could have convinced me what all of us would have to endure to have the honor and privilege of exercising our constitutional right to vote. Throughout this campaign, Michael and I have spoken about issues and not personalities. This election was too important and too precious for us to act in any other way. Many people have offered support and friendship. Senator Kennedy, Senator Kerry, Congressman Barney Frank, Congressman Neal, Councilor Dostal, Councilor Mary Ann LaBarge, Councilor Michael Bardsley, and many others too numerous to mention. We have the best mayor in Massachusetts. We have great selectmen in the 1st Hampshire District. We have an informed and active constituency. With this group of people, there is no obstacle that we cannot overcome as long as you vote. As long as you vote, I will be able to fight for new school funding, for single-payer health care, for meaningful campaign finance reform, for real wages and a modern contracting system for our human services agencies, and for adequate funding for UMass. Please vote next Tuesday for new leadership in Boston. Please vote next Tuesday for knowledge and experience and commitment to change. Please vote for the 300 families that are forced to live in motels tonight because they have no voice on Beacon Hill. Please vote for you and your families. And please vote for all those children at home who are looking to you to set a good example. Thank you very much.
I want to thank the candidates for running a good campaign and for being here today to take questions from citizens in the district and make the time to explain themselves and help voters better understand what they stand for. And let me remind people that the special election to fill the 1st Hampshire District seat in the Massachusetts House of Representatives is next Tuesday, April 9th. Polls are open all day, and I would join the candidates in urging everyone to turn out for a good vote. Thank you very much for being here today, and thank you for the candidates.
Feel free to come ask questions, of course.
On bears and beavers.
Haven't seen it yet.
I could tell.
Thanks again, Jeff. Appreciate it.
So did Gina. That was well done.
Thanks. Thanks for personing the camera. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Well, I was.